right, we are going to move on to testing now our tasks service. All right, and you can see that in this task folder, we do not have the spec files. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the user service spec file and I'm going to paste it into my task folder, and then I'm going to edit it. Okay, so instead of users, we're going to write tasks. Okay, I'm also going to kind of hurriedly delete, that's not a word, but I'm going to delete everything except that it should be defined tasks, so that way we can get a solid start. Okay, so we are describing the tasks service. So we need to import the tasks service. All right, we are going to be mocking the task repository. Before each test, we are going to set up the testing module, and our providers are going to be our tasks service. And we are going to get a repository token, which let's go ahead and scroll up in this article to read more about what the get repository token function does. All right, function from used to generate specific tokens based on entity classes. These tokens are then used as identifiers for the repositories in the testing module. Okay, so we don't want to use the user entity, we want to use the task entity instead. So we're going to import that, and we're going to use instead of using the actual task repository, we are going to use the mock task repository. Okay, so we're getting close to having this finished. And by finished, I mean having it set up. So we are going to move on to here we want this to be our task service, and here we want this to be our tasks service. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear my console. I'm going to run my test, but instead of running users, I'm going to run tasks. So it's calling the file, and you can see that task service should be defined, and it is defined. Perfect. All right, so then now I'm going to keep open the user service spec so that way we can review it if we have any questions about what we're doing, but I can close out of the user service. I'm going to reorder my tabs a little bit. I don't want the user identity or the user entity or the user module. And then I'm going to open up the task service. Okay. Looks like we are importing an exception we don't need. All right. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of minimize each of my functions so I can get an idea of how many I need to add tasks or tests for. So it looks like the first one is get user story task, so I'll expand that. We're passing in an ID, and then we're looking in the task repository for the tasks that are associated with that user story ID. So it looks like we're passing in a user story ID, and then we're getting all of the tasks associated with it, which makes sense based on the name of the function. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to kind of pull over my screen because I already have examples of all of this. I'm going to keep the service open so I can go ahead and see what that looks like. And then I'm going to close out of it here. And then I'm going to make another kind of break. Nope. Oh, here. I'm going to make another break with my service spec. And then I'm going to have my user service spec open here. So that way I'm working in this middle screen, but I can kind of keep what the goal is over here, and then I can kind of keep what the service function that I'm testing looks like. Okay, so I'm going to start writing my second test. So I want to get user story tasks. Okay, Then I'm going to describe what that's going to do. So it should find tasks corresponding to a user story ID. All right. Then I'm going to add my function, my asynchronous function in here that's going to do the work. Okay, so now it's time to look at my inputs and my outputs. So the inputs going into this function is an ID. So we're going to say const ID is equal to, let's say 1. Okay, my output is going to be a list of tasks, okay, where the user story ID is ID. Okay, so what I can do is I can say const tasks is going to be an array, and it's going to be an array of objects. Okay, so I'm going to add the type here where I'm going to say task array. All right, and then I can do name, let's say task 1, and then we're going to say status to do. All right, then I'm gonna, let's just for fun add another task so it seems more list-like. Okay, so now we have our input and our output. All right, the next thing that we're going to do is we want to spy on the task repository method that we're going to be calling. So we're going to say just.spy on, and we're going to say mock task repository, comma, and let's take a look at what we are spying on. We're spying on find. Now you can see that find doesn't exist here. And why? Because we're looking into the mock task repository, and we defined that up here, and we didn't define find. So now let me go and look to see if find1 is being used, and it is. So I'm going to add then find. I'm going to say just.fn, so we know it's going to be a mock function. Okay, now when I type in find, it sees it. Okay, then I'm going to mock the return value, and the return value should be tasks. Okay, next I actually need to call this service function and put my input in. Okay, oh, and we need an ID. All right, ID. Now what else is it mad at me about? Property user story. All right, I'm gonna look at the entity for this to see what it's looking for. So I'm gonna open up entity, and user story is gonna be the actual user story that is associated with it. Okay, I'm curious if I can get rid of that and then do as task array, and it's not mad. Okay, we're gonna stick with that. Okay, next we are going to then do const result is equal to await service dot get user story tasks with the ID. Okay, we then expect the result to equal tasks. All right, so now I'm going to run this, and you can see that we passed 2. Okay, so now that we passed this, we can go ahead and add the methods that we called as tests. So we expect mock task repository dot find to have been called, and we expect mock task repository dot find to have been called with the ID. Nope, with this. Oops. All right, now let's run our test again and see. Yep, and we still pass. Okay, so that means that we have successfully tested this get user story tasks. All right, and we can move on to testing create task. So I'm going to minimize this, and I'm going to minimize this, and I'm going to find the create user because that's likely going to be kind of the one that maps the most. Okay, and we will continue. So it create task. All right, and then it should okay, so let's look at how we worded this. Should return the user object that is passed into the method with the ID property. So should return the tasks associated, I'm going to say the tasks associated with the user story ID that is passed in addition to an extra task with name that was passed in. That was not great of me, but it's all right. All right, async. All right, so now we want to take a look. So the first thing that we do is we look at our inputs and our outputs, okay? So our input is going to be const name is going to be, let's call this task 3. Then we're going to say const user story ID is going to be equal to 1. Those are inputs. Then we're going to have const tasks is going to be equal to, and then I'm going to just steal this task list here, and I'm going to put it here, and then I'm going to add the third one. And I'm going to say task 3. Okay. Next, I'm going to spy on the method from the task repository that we're using, and I'm going to mock the return value. So just spy on mock task repository. In this, we are using save. So we're going to use save. And then we're going to say mock return value. And the return value that's going to come out of save, all right, does not really matter because we're not using it, but we might as well. Okay. So it is going to be, let's do const saved task is going to be equal to, and then we're going to add it here. Okay. So we're going to say saved task, because what we're doing is we're saving the name of a task and associating it with a user ID, and so then it should come back and tell us that. It also technically would come back, so let me do as task, and then we should also have a user story here where the ID should be 1, like that. So then we can add this as well to this, okay? Which then the user story would also have like a name and description, but we don't really necessarily care about that. Okay, so then if you notice, our get user story tasks is going to be called, which is right above it, and it's going to be using find. So we also want to just spy on mock task repository find, and we are going to mock returned value, and we are going to return the value tasks. Okay, so basically we are going to pass in a name and a user story ID. We're going to then go, we're going to save, called the save method with the name and the user story ID, and that we're going to mock the return, which is going to be a saved task. Okay, then we're going to take that user story ID and we are going to call get user story task with the ID to get all of the tasks, and we're mocking that find method and returning those tasks, okay? So what we then need to do is we need to say const result is going to be await service dot create task, and we're going to pass in the name and the user story ID, okay? And the first test we'll do is we expect that the result to equal tasks. All right, let's run the test and see what happens. All right, so that happens nicely, which is great. But we can have more tests in addition to that. So I can say expect service dot get user story task to have been called. So let's go ahead and run that. Uh-oh. Received value must be a mock or spy function. Okay, that's okay. I guess we won't add that one. So let's do expect. We can do it with expect that find one instead. So mock task repository.find to have been called. Let's try that one instead, which it would only be called if this function is called. So that is testing the same thing. Perfect. We also expect mock task repository.save to have been called. All right, so let's run the test again, and then we're going to add what they should be called with, okay? So we expect the mock task repository.find to have been called with, and then we are going to go and steal this here. All right, and then instead of this is going to be ID is equal to user story ID. All right, let's run this. Passed. And then we want to add expect mock task repository.save to have been called with, and this is what we will call it with. And let's run the test. All right, so we're about halfway through testing now. We still have to do update task and delete task, but I think we'll call it a day here in this video, and we will continue testing our task service in the next one.